This is Forestwalker, The Wandering Souls, written by Ben Kibbe, performed and narrated by Alicia Posey and Ben Kibbe. Foreword. You may be familiar with the concept of a message in a bottle. In case you are not, the idea is that someone would write a note, place it in a bottle, cork the bottle, and throw it into the ocean. A message in a bottle is not an SOS. It's not really even an actual communication with the outside world. It is, rather, the embodiment of hope beyond reason. This story is a message in a bottle. I don't know who will read it or listen to it, or if anyone else ever will. It has a very specific hoped-for audience, yet that hope is the same that is sealed in a bottle and thrown into the ocean. At the same time, if you are reading or listening to this, you are the right audience. Like everything else ever written, like every life ever lived, intentions are only the starting point. They do not matter as much as what grows from them. And every story ever told, fiction or non, is a mixture of truth and tall tale. Each is cobbled together from the experiences, loves, passions, hates, hopes, fears, from all the pieces and parts the storyteller has collected over the course of a life. Even a completed story is never really static. Think about any story you loved as a child. Consider how its meanings and nuances seem to alter over the years, how some phrases and moments stand out to you now because of who you were when you first read them, or how others stand out to you now because you didn't notice them before. Stories grow and change as we do because they are living things, dynamic things, telling us as much about ourselves as they ever do about the author or the author's intent. Every story ever put into words is both an invention and an imperfect recollection of the truth. Narratives are immersive portraits, serving both as a kind of plea the author throws out into the void hoping to be seen, and an invitation for the audience to find their place within the tale. All of this makes me think of one of my favorite books that I first read in college, Caramello by Sandra Cisneros. A central theme of the book is that honesty is something not fully encompassed by facts. Every experience and every story and every narrative we keep is colored by 1,000 things inside of us over which we have no control. Knowing that is not enough to offset it, but if we approach both our stories and those of others with the knowledge that they are less about factual truths than they are about imperfect memories of feelings and emotions, perhaps we can avoid the error of taking anyone's version of events as if it were an accurate and factual record. I think that applies as much to our own versions of events as it does to those of others. So I like the idea of a fictionalized narrative. It makes more clear the relationship between the story and the facts. It is much easier to remember when you're reading a story like this one, with overlapping perspectives from different characters, that our stories are not statements of fact, but rather representations of memories and all the other faulty and often misguided things that exist within our hearts and minds. Dedication. I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you about the things that happened and about the things that never happened. I want to take these millions of threads of memories and hopes and losses and near-missed dreams, and I want to weave them into a story for you of something that never was, but that now, in these pages, is. I am, indirectly, going to tell you about someone sitting across the aisle on a bus, of a smile from a stranger who never became a friend, of a sigh from a friend who became a stranger. I will place these words out the window of a car driving down the highway and let them fly on the wind like a child's hand imitating a plane. We will dive headfirst into waters no one has ever swum. We'll mourn the loss of someone who has never lived. We'll walk in the light of a sun that has never shone on the scene we inhabit, among trees that never grew, on a path leading to places I have yet to even imagine into existence. And between these threads, I will weave a specifically unspecified I love you. That is itself only a dream that was created long ago from a million unrelated threads. Threads that, with time and wear, have become individually indistinguishable. And when it is done, I hope that the journey will have fed some portion of that endless hunger of living for me and for you, that the long dead will have life in these pages, and that the never lived will live on in our hearts. And when we are gone and can tell stories no more, I hope someone else will find threads here to recycle into the stories that they weave, and that perhaps when the universe itself has put out its final light and fallen into its last darkness, these dreams may somehow live on even in that eternal slumber. For the boys, wherever you are, whoever you become, whatever you may think of me, you are and always will be the loves of my life. Chapter 1. Good morning, Phelan. Phelan woke with a too familiar pit in his stomach and the lingering memory of a road winding up and into a mountainous landscape. As his senses materialized, he tried to push back those uninvited feelings of loss that always seemed to accompany his dreams. Trying to focus his eyes as he glanced around the one-room cottage, he felt the soft, furry lump curled beside him where Buddy, the grumpy old house cat, was insisting himself into Phelan's body heat. Buddy's lynx-like tufted ears twitched at Phelan's movements, but the black and white ball of fluff remained otherwise motionless. Phelan pulled his arm from beneath the canvas furs that made up his bedding, his hand seeking that perfect spot just behind and between the small cat's ears. He lightly rubbed Buddy's head, eliciting an eventual purr, soft and low. Buddy slitted his eyes at the morning light, following up with a yawn that looked like it should encompass a roar. "Shall we have some breakfast?" Phelan asked. Buddy answered with a slow stretch and a shake of his head, then flopped back against the soft furs still warm from their combined heat. He looked up at Phelan, watching for some sign that his companion actually meant to get up. Phelan smiled and began to laugh, cut short by a yawn of his own. Laying back again, he let his mind wander while his eyes unfocused themselves toward the ceiling. Snippets of his dream returned to him as intangible feelings and indistinct imagery. He remembered being in one of those strange enclosed carriages he often dreamed about, fanciful things pulled at incredible speed by invisible horses. He recalled passing through towns as he navigated the magical vehicle up and deep into some foreign mountain range. Someone else was with him, asleep in the back, and he felt a kind of warmth when he let his mind rest on that fact. The memories of his dreams were always pleasantly mournful, like unbearable echoes of hope and loss. The poke of a claw interrupted his thoughts. Buddy's paw had worked beneath the furs and canvas, and the cat was glaring at Phelan as he tugged at his skin. When Phelan made eye contact, Buddy gave a high-pitched meow that cracked with the disuse of early morning. He pushed that single claw a bit deeper into Phelan's side. "Ow!" Phelan exclaimed with a laugh. Okay, all right. Breakfast it is." Buddy slipped from the bed to the floor, staying just ahead of the waves of bedding that rolled toward him as Phelan stretched his way out from under the covers. The two converged moments later at the rough wooden table that dominated the center of the one-room cottage. Buddy took a seat on the table while Phelan sat on the only stool he owned and unwrapped a hunk of dried meat. He proceeded to cut at the meat with a large hunting knife, alternating between large chunks for himself and not much smaller pieces that Buddy would quickly devour. He smiled at the way the small cat tore into the smoked venison, holding it down with his front paws and ripping it apart as if he were a mountain lion devouring his latest catch. As Phelan watched, his chewing slowed momentarily and his face took on a quizzical look. "Do you even need food?" Phelan mused in the cat's direction. The growl he received in answer seemed to imply Buddy both understood the question and did not appreciate its implications. All right, sorry. I just don't really understand how all this works yet," he apologized, cautiously reaching for and rubbing the cat's head between his ears. Buddy responded with a sound between a growl and a purr, continuing to tear apart the meat with relish. Soon, the pot over the nearby fire was boiling, and Phelan got up to set his morning tea to steep. As he rose, he rolled the hunk of meat back up in its wrapping and took it with him. Buddy shot an angry look at Phelan's hands as they worked, then at Phelan. He tore at the piece he already had with an added fury, as if he meant to demonstrate just how not finished he was with his breakfast. "Oh, whatever," Phelan shot in the cat's direction as he placed the roll high on a shelf. "If you're still hungry, you can always go catch your own deer." Buddy's grumbling growl did not indicate agreement, but he was used to this kind of terse response from Phelan and was determined not to let it spoil his breakfast. A few minutes later, steaming beverage in hand, Phelan opened the small wooden portal that served as the cottage's only door. Dragging his stool with him, he stepped up and over the threshold, leaving the door open as he settled down just outside with his tea and took in the sights, smells, and sounds of the deep forest. After a few moments, Buddy emerged lazily from the cottage, his eyes half closed against the morning light. The cat held his nose high to sniff in the general direction of the road that passed just out of sight through the trees, then turned to Phelan and leapt gracefully into his lap, his small body flowing through the air like a liquid poured in reverse. Phelan smiled down at his companion, then reached over and set down his tea on a large flat rock he kept near the door for just that purpose. He began to stroke the cat with both hands, running each in turn from head to tip of tail, and Buddy responded with loud, luxurious purrs. What had begun with the disturbing edges of dreams had turned into a pleasant autumn morning, and the two companions basked in the bright sunlight that warmed them against the first crisp touches of winter hanging in the air. Despite the lateness of the year, the forest still teemed with life. Phelan's keen ears provided him a picture of woodland creatures going about their morning activities. The imagery in his head was as clear as if he were seeing it with his eyes. Yet even his ears did not pick up half of what Buddy's senses explored as he settled down into Phelan's lap. Even as his body lay perfectly still, Buddy's tufted ears twitched back and forth, tracking every movement in the surrounding woods. For Phelan, the forest sounds could have been an orchestra tuning up and leading into some beautiful symphony. Every movement and sound combined into a calming kind of music that filled his heart and warmed his soul. There was a perfection to such moments that took him out of this world and this life, lifting him to some other plane of thought and existence. Of course, perfection never lasts. Just as Phelan was beginning to really enjoy his contentment, a discordant sound in the distance pulled him unwillingly from his reverie. He muttered some words of annoyance under his breath, but slowed his breathing to listen more closely. Buddy perked up. He rose from Phelan's lap, then dropped lithely to the ground, his ears scanning the general direction of the disturbance. He sat poised for a moment, his hindquarters slowly tensing in preparation as his whole body began to emit a faint glow. Phelan watched the cat, his annoyance growing as the pleasant moment he'd been enjoying slipped further from him. "Really? Come on, man. I'm pretty sure it has nothing to do with anything we need to worry about." Buddy gave no acknowledgement to Phelan's protest, instead launching into a run. As he dashed across the clearing, the soft glow he had been emitting faded and his body began to grow. By the time he slipped into the woodline, Buddy was a full meter long and still growing. "I don't suppose there's any point in asking you to wait," Phelan hollered after the cat as he disappeared from view, knowing the question itself was pointless. By the time Buddy slipped from sight, he was already as big as a full-grown man and tearing ahead at an incredible pace. He was in hunt mode and would not be coming back until he had his fill of fighting. With a sigh, Phelan reached inside the doorway. His hand returned with a collection of weaponry neatly bundled for just such occasions. This was far from the first time Buddy had taken off without waiting for Phelan to follow. "I swear, the inconvenience of being this close to the road does not make up for the annoyance," Phelan muttered to himself as he closed and fastened the door. Slinging his quiver, short sword, and bow, he headed toward the sounds of combat. His pace was unhurried as he crossed the clearing, but as he entered the forest, some instinct quickened his limbs. He began to run with an easy and fluid gait that, though he would not admit it to himself, demonstrated that he was as eager for a fight as his furry companion. As Phelan neared the road, the sounds of conflict grew louder. A surprised shout accompanied by a string of profanity and screams of "Get it off!" told Phelan that Buddy had already reached the situation and chosen a side. He quickened his pace and pulled an arrow from his quiver. He could just make out 3 figures now, one on his back with Buddy at his throat, another backing away with a level of indecision that would doom him, and a third, a woman with a religious appearance, about to cast a spell at the second. Phelan paused just out of sight and prepared to take a shot, but there was no point by the time he was ready. In a flash of light, the indecisive man was thrown to the ground and calling for mercy. His friend had gone silent, and Buddy was now eyeing his next potential quarry with morbid eagerness. "Call him off! Call him off! I surrender!" the second man yelled when Buddy began to stalk toward him. Though he was writhing on the ground in pain from whatever spell the woman had hit him with, his eyes were fixed on Buddy. It was at this point that Phelan noticed the other bodies lying in the roadway. 3 slumped figures were moaning quietly in a semicircle around the woman, appearing too far gone to register the new entrant to the fight. "Buddy," Phelan called out as he strode from the trees, "I think she's got this." He held up a hand and motioned for the cat to come to him. Buddy glanced at Phelan, then the woman, who looked back and forth untrustingly between the cat and the man who had just emerged from the forest. Finally, Buddy gave a disappointed-sounding huff in the prone attacker's direction, then bounded like an oversized kitten at Phelan. "Oh, no, Phelan called out with wide eyes as the tiger-sized cat flew at him. The woman began to raise her hands as if to cast, but held short as she watched the giant beast bowl the man over, then proceed to nuzzle his face, while purring like an oversized house cat. Phelan laughed and took Buddy's head in his hands, rubbing noses with the cat. "This would be much more adorable if your muzzle wasn't covered in that guy's blood," he said in a teasing tone. Buddy continued to nuzzle him and, possibly in response to the comment, wiped his maw across the front of Phelan's tunic, leaving a streak of blood on his friend's chest. After a moment, Phelan heard the woman's voice directed toward him.
"So I assume this tiger is with you?"
Phelan and Buddy paused in unison and turned their heads toward the woman. She was standing closer now, almost over top of the pair. Phelan offered a sheepish grin as he tried to dislodge himself from under Buddy and stand. "You could say that. I hope he didn't." Phelan paused as he glanced around the field of battle, then back to the woman who, it appeared, would have managed perfectly well without Buddy's intervention. "Well, he likes a good fight, so, yeah,"
"Apparently."
the woman responded as she studied Buddy. Slowly, she extended a hand toward him in invitation. Buddy perked up at the offer. He moved toward her with an easy, relaxed gait, his shoulders rising and falling in that manner peculiar to big cats that embodies their self-assured power. Her lips parted in the slightest of smiles, and she extended her hand further. Suddenly, Buddy leaped. The woman was caught off guard and almost froze, barely able to take a step back as the heavily muscled beast soared through the air at her. She let loose an instinctive noise that is near impossible to describe, a kind of shocked guttural sound, too low-pitched to be a scream, but too short to be a yell, and best written out as "gah." Her shock was in no way lessened when, instead of being knocked over as Phelan had been, she suddenly found herself holding a normal-sized house cat in her arms, the small animal nestling down into her embrace and purring as if she were his oldest friend. At this new shock, the woman let go a much more pleased, higher-pitched sound, yet one no more easy to describe than the first and simply impossible to write. It would not be right to call it a squeal, but it would not be entirely incorrect either. After a moment, she shot Phelan a questioning look, but only received his laughter in response. "Buddy's a bit unusual," he finally managed to get out between chuckles.
"That he is,"
she said as her attention turned back to the small cat in her arms. She brought out her free hand to pet him, her fingers falling instinctively on the soft patch of fur between his ears. Buddy pushed his hand up into her palm in response, his purring growing in intensity.
"Odd name, though. Buddy,"
she said, rolling the name over her tongue like she was trying to gather information from tasting it.
"What language is that?"
I guess it's mine?" Phelan responded, his voice trailing off with uncertainty as he glanced around with some discomfort. "It's all kind of a long story, sort of, and I don't really know all the parts of it myself." This statement earned Phelan a look from the woman that mixed distrust with curiosity. Seeing the look she gave him, Phelan let his mouth hang open like it was about to start speaking. However, the only sound that came out was a series of vowel-like noises in one long flow. Finally, after a few awkward moments, the string of sounds resolved themselves into words. "It's just what I started calling 'em, is the simplest way to explain it," he said. About that time, all the separate elements of the current tableau came together as a single awareness in the woman's mind. The moaning assailants lying in the road, the man who'd emerged inexplicably from the forest mid-attack, the small cat in her arms who had, only a short time before, been a full-sized tiger. She began to giggle, silently at first, and resolving into full-on laughter as she smiled down at Buddy and continued scratching his head.
Well, I don't know why, but I think it fits him.
She said. With that, she turned back toward her attackers, Buddy still in her arms, and began to look them over. End of chapter 1.